Hi, everybody. Let me know that you're here. It's good to see everyone again. Tonight is your night to ask me anything. So I'm going to just wait a couple minutes for more people to join us. Happy New Year to everyone. Let me check. I'm using all new hardware tonight and some new software. So give me a moment to get used to everything. Things are arranged a little differently than I'm used to using them. So things should look and sound much better to you on your end, perhaps than they did in the past. Okay, here we go. Lots of people saying hello. I'm just going to move this over here. Oh, here, it's good to see lots of regulars here with us tonight. It's good to see all of you again. I feel like I've been gone a really long time. Oh, I got a question already. Okay, that's a good one. I feel like I've been gone a long time, even though it's only been 2 weeks since I've seen all of you. Thank you. This is an 18th century bedgown, as we would call it. You might call it a robe. And underneath is the standard chemise that ladies would wear to sleep and to also wear under their regular day clothes, underneath their stays and their gowns and dresses and things like that. So this would be kind of typical evening attire for a lady at home who's not expecting any guests, with a little bed cap and everything, and my hair just out and in a little tail on the side. So this would be kind of a pretty typical 18th century evening appearance for someone who's not expecting any guests that aren't very close friends or family members. So we're a little informal tonight. Happy New Year to all of you as well. And as I was saying, over the last couple of weeks, Mr. Q and I, 20th century Mr. Q, that is, or 21st century Mr. Q and I have upgraded all of the hardware here in our studio. So I'm hoping things are looking and sounding a bit better. And over the coming weeks, I'm going to be changing my broadcasting software to something a little bit more professional as well, so that I can invite others into Mrs. Q Live, like a real TV show, and begin a new series I'm going to have, which is going to be Mrs. Q Presents. It's going to be an 18th century talk show. So we'll be Mrs. Q and other guests talking about various events and people of the 18th century. I hope you'll join me for that and that you'll all enjoy it. I've been busy inviting other history interpreters to come on the show as it develops. So if there is an 18th century character you would like to see on the show, you should let me know. And if I know someone who portrays that character, I will be happy to invite them on for you. So think about that. And let me see, let me get myself a little balanced here. I have a thing with visual balance. I like everything to look nice and balanced when I'm doing this. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to scroll through here and look through your questions. Let's see. Volume is good. Some of you like the talk show idea. Great. I think that's going to be loads of fun doing a talk show from the 18th century. Okay, let me look back. And remember, you can ask me anything about Mrs. Q in the 18th century. You're also welcome to ask me anything about my professional life in this century. So questions about my professional life are welcome as well. Some of the typical ones I get was, how did I get into doing tours? Have I always loved history? All kinds of things like that. How did I develop Mrs. Q? Those kinds of questions are all welcome as well. So let me go back to the top and see what the first one is. Do I think Peggy Shippen was the mastermind behind the treason of Benedict Arnold? For those of you who don't know, Peggy Shippen was Benedict Arnold's wife. So she was Peggy Shippen Arnold. She was a very intelligent, clever, and decently educated young woman from Philadelphia, from a very wealthy loyalist merchant family. And learned pretty much how to play the politics of the time very well. Many people believe that it was her friendship with John Andre that led to the turning of her husband, Benedict Arnold. I know there are letters that have been unfound between Peggy and Andre that might indicate that she really was the mastermind of this. I think it's much more likely she was the go-between, that she was the person who put Andre and Arnold in touch. Andre, of course, was always reaching out to look for Washington's officers he could turn. And it was very apparent to people everywhere that Arnold was very unhappy with his current position in the American army. So I think it's likely that Mrs. Arnold was the go-between between Andre and General Arnold. Because when we look at some of the correspondence, we can see that the real negotiating went on between Arnold and Andre as to what Andre was going to do for Arnold, what Arnold was going to do with Andre, and also correspondence with Andre and his commander, General Clinton. But that's not to minimize Peggy Shippen's role. I'm sure Peggy's role was large in that whole operation. But as you may also know, she never suffered any penalty for it, because at that time, it was considered that ladies were not smart enough or educated enough to put together such a complex plan. So no one would have suspected her, since the gentlemen of that time felt that ladies did not have the mental capabilities to formulate something so complex with so many different moving parts and things, and that a lady simply couldn't have done it. So she played her part very well as an innocent woman wronged by her husband. And most everyone believed that. Even people at that time who believed she had something to do with it likely would not have believed she was an active participant, because it just wasn't believed that women could do such things. So I'll leave that at that. Which brings me to the next question. How did Theodosia utilize her formal education? So now that would be Miss Theodosia Burr, later Mrs. Joseph Alston of Charleston, South Carolina, who was the first young woman of her time to be educated equally to a firstborn son, including a Princeton level education. And so again, here we have a young lady educated as a man, and many people, of course, thought that this couldn't be done. And Mr. Aaron Burr and his wife set out to prove that a woman could achieve the same intellectual abilities as a man, a talented woman, just as a talented man could, and still very much be a woman and not lose their mind or become a man or something, whatever strange thing they thought might have happened to you if you were educated at that time and a woman. So Theodosia was very highly educated, and unfortunately, probably the most use that she put her education to was being a political advisor to her husband, Joseph Alston, who rose very quickly in his career from being a local politician to being the governor of South Carolina. And he did that very quickly with her help and her guidance. Otherwise, she had no opportunity. The first reason is that she was in South Carolina, where, as she said to her father, and please, my friends in the South, do not be insulted by what I'm going to say. Theodosia wrote to her father that the women were imbeciles, completely uneducated, and could barely read and write, and that the men had no interest in being in the company of a woman who was educated. So that was her observation at the time. So surely in South Carolina, she had no opportunity to use it, except maybe in the company of her husband and the wonderful letters she wrote to her father and her friends in New York. So that would have been her limitation in using her education. She also died just short of her 30th birthday, which gave her no opportunity in the future to go forward with the education she had. So although she proved it could be done, she really didn't show what a woman could do with that. So that would be left to future women later than her. But certainly she laid the groundwork with the proof that a woman could achieve the same educational levels as a man very early on. So she would have done that in the 1790s, for those of you who are not familiar with that story. Someone thinks that Peggy sold out her husband. I think she stuck with him right to the end, right? She stayed loyal to him and moved to England with him. And I think they had 5 or 6 children together. And, she never sold him out. So that's, at least she stayed honorable to her husband. Is there evidence of or proof of a dalliance between Sally Fairfax and George Washington? That I do not know, as I am not that well schooled in the lives of the Virginians. So for that, I would have to pass. But if there's anybody out there watching who might know the answer to this, you are welcome to join the conversation and post the answer to that question. One of my wonderful followers just sent me a book about the lives and the political activities of the Virginians leading up to the Revolutionary War. It's a wonderful book, and I've not yet been able to start reading it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that and learning more about the radical Virginians, of Mrs. Q's time. Were Theodosia's parents criticized for educating her? Yes, indeed they were. And one of Aaron Burr's very good friends declared it to be an absolute waste of time. So it was an absolute waste of time. He said, of course, she might be able to master these things, but what good is it as she has no knowledge of the sewing needle? And by that, he didn't really mean that women were only valuable if they could sew. What he was trying to say, and that was Colonel Robert Troup, also a good friend of Hamilton's, what he was trying to say was by having no knowledge of the sewing needle, she had no knowledge of what would bring her into female society, that she would have no place in female society. And he knew, of course, she would have no place in male society, although it looks as if she did have some place in New York City male society, as we do see young men like Washington Irving making comments about wonderful Theodosia Burr and how she was really the center of attention at every salon or every dinner party or every social event she attended, that the young men all flocked to her. That she was quite beautiful, gracious, and, spoke English, French, and Italian. She danced, she played the harp, she sang, she did all these things. But the young men also enjoyed challenging her knowledge, which Washington Irving said she met every time with grace and beauty, was able to answer all of their questions. And he said often bettering them with her beauty and grace and sophistication. Many people in New York thought that Washington Irving would marry Theodosia Burr. And there was a speculation on the part of some of her biographers that the reason Washington Irving left New York for Europe and never married was that after knowing Theodosia Burr, he could not find another woman that he found to be an acceptable companion. That after, being with a woman who was so witty and so intelligent, really his own intellectual match, both in thinking, creativity, and solid education, that every other woman just fell short of that, and that was the reason he never married. So those were some of the rumors at the time. I can't tell you whether those rumors are true, but they're fun to read. How did I get my start giving tours? And this is from one of my neighbors who was asking from up the street. So Anna, it's good to see you tonight. How I got my start giving tours. So some of you might know or may not know that prior to being a historian, I worked for many years on Wall Street, developing statistical and risk models and other types of things for trading desks. It was a very challenging and fun, and for a time anyway, rewarding career, but eventually it became something I didn't want to do anymore. So I left and I took a couple of years off. And during that time, started doing something that I'd wanted to do for a long time. And that was read original documents from the founding of America. Read the documents that were coming out when we were rebelling against the king. Like, what were people really talking about? What were they saying? What was the real politics? What were people really up to? And I'm happy to be here in New York, where we have a massive treasure of these documents. And I just simply started reading them. Once I began, I could not stop. And well, after a couple of years of that, I was having lunch with a Wall Street friend. We walked through Grand Central Terminal and someone was giving a tour. And when we sat down to lunch, he said to me, "You should do a tour about the American Revolution." And I thought, oh, well, nobody will ever come to that. And he said, look, you have so many opportunities on Wall Street and you can always come back. But this is a door and you should go through it and see where it leads you. No risk, no gain. And so in 2005, I started Patriot Tours, and I started with my one little Revolutionary War era tour. And it did so well that things grew over the years to other tours that I have done. As you know, for a time, I did a Civil War tour, which I might bring back, maybe virtually, an architecture tour, which I am going to bring back in the spring, my Hamilton and Burr tour, which is very popular. I bet some of you have been on that. And I got invited as a result of those tours to appear on a TV show called Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum. I did almost 30 episodes of that. I also have been called to consult for news stories, newspaper, radio, on events of, the 18th century in New York. And during the pandemic, almost 2 years ago now, I started doing Mrs. Q live. And here we are a couple of years later with Mrs. Q having been expanded to, live in-person events and some of these other things I'll be doing this year. So that's how that all came about. So my advice to you is sometimes when something in your life changes unexpectedly and you feel sorrow that that door has closed, you really should look around because another door might open that will take you to someplace you never imagined, someplace really wonderful and fulfilling. So never close your eyes to the opportunities that could be there in front of you. So let me see, let me back up because there are a lot of questions here. I'm so happy you guys are all asking things. How did 18th century not suffocate wearing so many layers of clothing with no air conditioner? Wow, that is a really good question. And I did not really understand that until I started dressing up myself and doing events in the summertime in my clothes. And there were a few things. Types of fabrics. Remember, in the 18th century, the fabrics are all natural fabrics. So the ladies are wearing woven. This is a muslin, which is, very, very light. This is actually my summer chemise, the one that I wore to wear for summer reenactments. I have a heavier one made of a more closely woven cotton that was too heavy for the summer. So lighter fabrics like muslins and linens would be worn. In the winter, heavier fabrics. The stays really are not that hot. I know a lot of people have the idea that the 18th century stays are like the later corsets we see in cartoons, where somebody has their foot on the lady's back and they're lacing the stays as tight as possible. That's later. That's not 18th century. The 18th century stays are really meant just to give your body a shape and not necessarily, they don't pull the waist in like that. So it's just to give your body a shape. And the shape is that everything up here gets pushed up very voluptuously, right? So the young ladies are going to let a lot of that show over the top of their gown. The more mature or modest ladies will tuck in a scarf, right? Tuck in a scarf. And so it pulls this all up, it pushes everything down, and it gives you a nice cone shape. And it really is not that uncomfortable at all, not in any time of year. Ladies would wear lighter petticoats as well in the summer, so more linen and muslin petticoats, and the heavier wool or quilted ones in the winter. So it really isn't that bad. The summers did get hot and there was no air conditioning, so there's a lot of fanning yourself and natural breezes. Of course, at the height of the day in the summer, people are not very active. Many people would close their shops in the afternoon, go home and take an afternoon meal and relax during the heat of the day, reopen their shop later in the afternoon and stay open later into the evening than we might be used to. So a kind of idea of a siesta, but not really a siesta, just closing your shop, maybe going home, having a light meal, and then reopening later when it's cooler. So really trying to be active when the temperature is not so bad. But I learned myself that most of my outfits were too heavy for summer wear and had to make some new ones this past summer, and not heavy enough for winter wear. As you might know, I made that very nice quilted jacket because my other clothes were too light. So I myself have been learning about how to make clothes and wear clothes appropriate to the weather for that time, because you can't just, we have such ease today, right? We have central heating. Here, of course, would be the bedroom fireplace for a cold winter night. And of course, someone with a bedroom fireplace would be a little bit high up on the economic level to have a bedroom fireplace. Many families had one hearth and the whole family gathered around that hearth. Everything was done around that hearth. Mrs. Q, of course, is a successful merchant, so she has a little bedroom fireplace as well. And a couple other rooms would have fireplaces for a lady of Mrs. Q's status, but not everyone would have that. Let's see. My hair does look, Colonel Talmadge, my hair does look rather bluish. And I would like to say that that is blue hair powder in my hair. but it is truly a wig with blue strands in it. But let's say it's blue hair powder, all the rage in the 1780s with the white hair powder and the gray hair powder. So for period's sake, let's say that this is very popular blue hair powder available in my shop in Hanover Square. If you so desire, ladies, to make your hair blue, you could do that. Yes, I will be restarting that architectural tour. You'll all hear about it. Why do we call it a Revolutionary War instead of a Civil War? That is a good question, and it's because of the Declaration of Independence. We declared ourselves an independent nation separate of England, instituting a completely new government, which makes it a revolutionary war. So this was a revolutionary overthrow of the current government and instituting a new government. It's not that we just separated from England, we threw off the English government completely. And although England might have looked at it more as a civil war and the idea that it was England fighting England and they had the right to do whatever they needed to hold their country together, the Declaration of Independence as a legal document made it a revolutionary war, a new country, in order for us to obtain support from England's enemies. So a little bit about the politics of the royal families of England and Europe at that time. Now, you probably know they fought each other all the time, right? The French and the English and the Spanish and the Austrians and everyone else, right? They fought each other all the time. The Portuguese were always fighting. One thing they would not do was interfere in a country's internal strife. So if the crown of, say, Austria was having trouble with the people of Austria, and it became martial in form, you know, that the king or queen there had to use the military to quell uprising in Austria, none of those other monarchs would get involved because it was an internal problem. For us to gain the support of all of those enemies of England, we had to be a different country to do so. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, that's what it does. It states that we are now a new nation separate from England with our own government, United States of America. And that makes it a revolutionary war. When we get to the 1860s, when the Confederacy separated from the North, it's a similar idea in that they did have their own government, but because the North fought and the North won and the country was reunited, it's America warring with America. It's a civil war. And as you may have noticed, no countries interfered in that because the other countries viewed it as an internal matter. The South did attempt to gain support from Britain during the Civil War, and Britain, you probably know, refused to help them. So this was an internal matter to the United States of America, where us fighting England now became two countries at war, and England's rivals were happy to help us. So it's a little bit of a distinction. I don't know if I explained it that well. Someone else would like to chime in and explain it a little more clearly, of course, you're always welcome to. As you know, on my tours, I always welcome people to speak up. Oh, thank you so much. A wonderful compliment here on YouTube. Your friend was correct. You're good at what you do with your tours, and with history, I get it right. Thank you so much. I try really hard to be an engaging tour guide, to give everyone on the tour a really good time, and also to be as accurate in my retelling of the history as possible. So thank you very much. I work very hard on it. Oh, no deodorant and no bathing, right? No bathing. Only someone extremely wealthy would have a tub with heated water in their home. So there's also no bathing. People did do sponge baths regularly, daily sponge baths, clean themselves very thoroughly. But certainly it was not like what we're used to today. Not, you know, like I take off my wig and go get in the shower and take a nice shower when I'm done, pop on my makeup. It's not the same, right? So the level of cleanliness is quite different. And to give you an idea, I know I've mentioned this series before. There was a series on TNT with Tom Hardy called Taboo. Some of you may have seen it. Got canceled after only one season. I thought it was wonderful. It's about the operations of the East India Tea Company in America. It's a little later than Mrs. Q's time period. It's the early 1800s. But one of the things that is wonderful about Taboo is you see how people really lived in London. And you see that even the homes of the wealthy, by our standards, are kind of filthy. There's like dust everywhere. People's clothes are not that clean. Their furniture has stains on it. You'll see. I think Taboo was wonderfully done. I don't know if any of you have seen Taboo. Let me know what you thought of it. I was very sorry there wasn't a second season. Tom Hardy was excellent in it, but it really gives you an idea of what life was like in London at that time, and the way the ideas of cleanliness were very different from our ideas today. Also, if you want to check out a couple of American series that will show you that. Also on TNT, The Alienist, which takes place in 1890s America, and very hard to find now, Copper, which was on BBC America, which takes place in the 1860s. Copper is really excellent if you can find it. It takes place during the Civil War period. And both of those will give you some idea of what the time period really was like. All three are well done. Mr. Billadello, also known as Colonel Talmadge, my good friend from Suffocate, New York, says the purpose was revolutionary, to break from England as a colony and form a new independent country. Thank you so much, my good friend. Yes, they had high-backed chairs around the fireplace to keep the heat around the people sitting. The hearth was very big, the fireplace where they gathered around, in that main room, which was where the cooking was done as well. And of course, people, had blankets and wool. And, this is cotton, but there are, of course, wool bed jackets from the time that you would have worn. I think there's a great scene in the John Adams series on HBO where John and Abigail are sitting in bed talking, and Abigail has on a wonderful wool bed jacket, heavy wool bed jacket, and a bonnet. And you can see that they're sitting in bed wearing wool bed jackets. And so that you can see it's quite cold, and that they're keeping warm with their wool bed jackets. The 18th century, it wasn't so much, Ms. King is asking me on Facebook, for those of you on YouTube and Zoom, she says it was actually in style to appear older in the 18th century gray hair pieces. I don't know if the idea was to appear older, but the gray hair was popular. So you see those wonderful portraits of Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton and Angelica Schuyler Church, and their big frizzy hedgehog hairdos that they're all white and gray. And it's just the fashion of the time, the white and gray hair powders and white and gray hair pieces. So I don't know if it had anything to do with looking older, because you see their eyebrows are dark like mine are here, and they look very young. I think it was just the color fashion for the hair at that time. The hair powder was fashionable. And, during the time of Marie Antoinette, a little bit, probably around that time, a little earlier, you see the pink hair powders and the blue hair powders becoming very popular, coming out of the French court. Miss Aquilino is making a wonderful statement here. She says, possibly because life was short back then, the older you were, the more knowledge you had. I don't know if people, as I said, wanted to appear older, but I will tell you that older people had far more respect then than we give them today, which I find to be very sad. So as I am representing an older Mrs. Q today with gray hair, I'm wearing a different type of makeup that doesn't cover my wrinkles so much. So I'm looking a little bit older. And by the way, I love this new makeup. Let me know what you think of it. I think it's gorgeous. This new makeup is just beautiful, much more natural looking. So I've changed a lot of things for us tonight. So anyway, Mrs. Q, as I'm representing here as an older lady with grandchildren and gray hair, would have a much higher place in society, respect-wise, than a lady of this age would find today, unfortunately. So that is an unfortunate thing about our modern time, something that was a little bit better at that time. And, actually, that is something I get asked on my tours a lot. Are there things I think were better at that time about life than now? And I would say that that is one of them. At that time, respect for one's elders and the experience they had in life. Also just a kind of social respect. I talk a bit about on the Hamilton and Burr tour, the kind of social respect that went on, that even when you met your rival in the street, gentlemen would still tip their hats and greet them as Mr. So-and-so. There was very much an idea of civil society, that there was a public way to conduct yourself, and that you always conducted yourself in that mannerly fashion. It made things go well on the street and at social functions, and it was a type of civil society and responsibility that we don't have anymore. I'm seeing what I think is a breakdown in that. And I think it's, detrimental to the way we treat each other. And you might say, well, wasn't it hypocritical? Because then they went and they wrote these incredibly insulting broadsides and used pseudonyms, even though everyone knew who was writing them. I don't know if you would call it hypocritical, but just the type of manners at the time, that although you knew who your rivals were, you knew what they were writing about you or perhaps saying about you, still you kept civil society, which was good for everyone. So, everyone would tip their hat to the ladies, depending on rank, the ladies might bow a bit or curtsy a bit to a gentleman, all for civil society, so that people maintained civility in public. And, the more I learn about that, the more I really like it. That's a personal thing. You might think it's a little old-fashioned. It's okay. So we have had some people who watched Taboo and thought it was a great show. I really enjoyed Taboo. The orange thing behind me over here is a shield for the heat in the fireplace. So if I suppose my good friend, Mrs. R, my printer friend, Mrs. R, was visiting, and we were sitting here at the fire, and the fire was lit, the person closest to the fire would place this between her and the fire in order to protect the makeup. Makeup at that time, a great deal of it was wax based and would melt in the heat. So that's just a makeup shield for a lady. And there's a lovely one. If you've ever visited John Jay's homestead, there's a lovely one in his bedroom, very beautifully, I don't know if it's embroidered or what. It is quite beautiful. So you would see these in a lady's bedroom like this, or a small parlor where ladies might sit close to the fire in order to protect their makeup from the heat. Thank you. I'm glad you like my makeup. I've tried many, and I really do like this one. I think it's quite natural looking, a little more natural than the one I was wearing before, because I'm trying to look more my normal age when I do these. So let's see, is that it? Is that all the questions? I can tell you some of the questions I most get asked on my tour. A big one I get asked on my tour is, do I think people were better educated then than they are now? What do some of you think? Do you think people were better educated then than we are now? And that means you need to kind of define what you mean as educated, right? So kind of have to define what you mean as educated. If you mean with a knowledge of the classical period, critical thinking, debate, Latin, Greek, geography, world history, literature, politics, and things of that nature, people who attended school, grammar, what do I want to say? Handwriting, penmanship, I want to say penmanship, and facility with language, especially written language. Yes, people who were educated then in those areas were better educated than people are today. And then, of course, there were people who specialized in areas who were very well educated. So, of course, like now, mathematicians, scientists, lawyers, things like that, who were very well educated. I do think when we look at letters, your average person who wrote letters was much better at forming ideas and expressing them in the written word than we are today. And of course, I blame email and social media for that. I am guilty of that in my own life as well. So I try to, as you know, post every day across social media, a sizable post, so that I keep my writing skills honed. So I do think people in those areas were better educated. We have an idea today that because we've been around longer and there's a larger body of knowledge about different things, that we're better educated, but that isn't necessarily so. So that's a question I get asked. Do I think that gentlemen like Hamilton and Burr were better educated than most of the people who hold office today? I would say yes. they were. Mr. Madison, all of them. So that is, another problem we face today. Um, a lady, a lady never left home without being appropriately dressed and styled. Of course. I mean, I might go out with this hair and this bonnet might be appropriate, but I would never wear a bed jacket out. I might sneak out into my yard in my bed jacket for one reason or another to quickly, do something, but no, never out my front door or onto the street, never at all. Everyone would have dressed appropriately, even ladies who were working ladies, seamstresses, cooks, servants of various kinds. I'm sure you've seen them still dressed in their gowns and scarves and nice bonnets, maybe plainer fabric than Mrs. Q wears, maybe plain cottons or wools, but still appropriately dressed in public. The gentlemen as well. I mean, you can see gentlemen walking around with their tunics, hanging out of their breeches, their pants, or anything like that. Or if they did, they might be drunk or have some other issue going on, but certainly the gentlemen are all dressed, as are the children. So that's all part of that civil society. What do I have from Mr. Jensen? He's asking me, and this is on Zoom, Mr. Jensen is asking, during the military occupation of New York City, how were the residents of New York treated? Were they like servants or second-class citizens? Who paid for the quartering of the soldiers? Could women be worried about being raped or abused? Did the residents have their own cows and chickens, and even in New York City, or were all supplied by farmers out of the city? During the British occupation, virtually all loyalists were second to the military, unless you were very wealthy loyalists, had family members serving as officers, for instance, the Delancey family, and were very wealthy and living in New York. You may be seen on the same level as the British officers who were, of course, aristocrats, landed gentry. So that class would be seen on the same level as the British officers. Everyone else is second class to the military. It's wartime. The soldiers have first choice of lodging. They get the first choice of good food because soldiers are needed to fight. Everyone comes second to the soldiers. There was quite a lot of abuse for the same reason. Soldiers often were not punished for attacking women or robbing or beating people. This was a big problem during the occupation of New York. Ladies, if they were thinking, did not go out without a woman escort, or even better, a male escort. If a couple ladies wanted to go out, it was much better to have a male escort with them. There were a lot of unruly soldiers in the city during that time who were not punished for their actions. So it was a very dangerous time for a lot of the women, and for all of the people who were under the occupation. It was not a nice time at all. People in the town did not have their own farm animals anymore, as the British took everything they needed and killed it and used it. So everything was being supplied from mostly Long Island or some parts of New Jersey or the Hudson Valley or Staten Island, but increasingly those places were running out as well. So the British were pretty much ravaging every place they could find to feed their massive military. So it was a very unpleasant time. When servants became too old to perform their tasks, what happened to them? That would depend on the servant, their status, how much money they'd saved, and the family and household for which they worked. Some families, kept servants on well into their old age. Some, I'm sorry to say, would end up in the poorhouse if they had no family members to care for them or no savings of their own. It was a very hard time. So that all depended on someone's particular station in life and how generous the people they had worked for over the years were. Let's see. Let me see if I missed any other things. Today, you might know, I was posting about 355. There is a new movie coming out. I think it's released this weekend, called The 355. It's a trailer about, I think it's a team of international women spies, kind of like a Mission Impossible thing. And the beginning of the trailer tells the story of the spy known as 355, or I should say tells one version of the story of the spy known as 355. And across social media today, I talked about my own favorite 355 story. 355 was the code in the Culper Spiring book, which meant simply lady. And I think that most serious students of the Culper Spiring think that 355 stood for any number of ladies that passed on information to the Culper ring, not one specifically, but the information about Benedict Arnold turning did come from a lady, 355. And there has been endless speculation over who that lady might have been. And my own particular favorite telling of that story is the portrayal in the TV series Turn, which I know a lot of you don't like because of all of the bad stuff in there. And there is a lot of bad stuff in there. And I didn't like some of it also. I mean, can you imagine Benjamin Talmadge being taken care of by a woman named Livingston, who is a loyalist? Really, that was a terrible mistake, but let's get beyond that. So 355, their 355 story was really good. The idea that a slave woman from Setauket was taken by the British into New York City and put in the home to serve the needs of Major John Andre. And she wasn't just any slave woman. Her name was Abigail. She can read. And it's perfect, right? Because whoever knew about Benedict Arnold had to be someone with access to Major Andre, intimate access to Major Andre, who could read his papers, his correspondence, who could listen to what he was talking about and understand it. Andre would have never suspected a slave woman, Abigail, of being able to read. She was a perfect character, I thought, and that she was in Andre's home. He came to trust her as running his household, and she would read through all of his documents and pass on the information. That is my personal favorite interpretation of 355, although there are many others. Some people think it was Mrs. Peggy Shippen Arnold. Some other people think it was Anna Strong, although she wasn't in New York with access to Andre, so it likely wasn't her. Some people think it was Elizabeth Bergen, a woman in New York who freed people from the prison ships. And she was a peddler woman who freed gentlemen from the prison ships, helped them escape. But she didn't have that kind of access to John Andre either. So it was someone who had to have intimate access to John Andre's correspondence. So I thought they handled it really well in Turn. So I wonder if some of you like that Turn story as well. And the woman who played Abigail, she was just, all of the women in Turn were just extraordinary. The woman who played Abigail was wonderful. The woman who played Peggy Shippen was stunning. So everyone was quite good in the series. Ms. King says she thinks John Andre must have been very nice looking since all the ladies fawned over him. The men fawned over him as well. When we look back at letters and people talking about him, it wasn't only the ladies who were taken in by John Andre's incredible good looks and charisma, but it was the men too. So John Andre must have had an extraordinary combination of gifts, both in his looks, his manners, his personality. He just must have been the total package, as we would call it in the 21st century, as many people were taken in by him. Why the interest in Cato? Remember, the gentlemen writing the broadsides are all classically educated. So they are all educated in the Roman Republic, the people involved in the Roman Republic, how the Roman Republic turned into an empire, and the people who were active in trying then to convert the empire back into a republic. So they often use the names of the gentlemen at that time who were trying to restore the republic. So you see Cato, or you see Brutus, or you see Poplicola, who was one of the men who established the original Roman Republic. So you see a lot of names like that. So Cato is a very popular character for that reason, his activities during the time of the Roman Republic and Roman Empire. And there were more than one Catos as well. So it kind of gets confusing when you're reading the old Roman stuff. So remember, everyone was educated in that, including some of the ladies who were educated. So, Theodosia Burr Alston would have been very well educated in who those gentlemen were. It's interesting, they identified more with the Roman writers than the Greek writers, and that you don't really see them using pseudonyms of any of the Greeks. You see them using the pseudonyms of the Romans. So they identified with the men fighting for the Roman Republic. So that kind of gives you an idea of what they thought America should be based on. So they're thinking more in terms of the Roman Republic than the Athenian democracies. They're using the Roman names instead. That gives us a little insight into, how they were thinking at the time. Let's see. Well, I think that is it for us tonight. So I want to let you know that I will be back every Friday night, hopefully every week, the technology improving a little bit more as I get used to it. There is a possibility I might be ending the Zoom part of this broadcast over the next month or so. I might not. So for those of you on Zoom, you may have to move over to Facebook or YouTube, but I'm going to try to keep the Zoom part intact because some of you have been with me a very long time on Zoom, and I don't want to make you have to switch platforms. Again, let me know if there's anyone you would like to see on Mrs. Q Presents. Any of my friends, I'm sure you can, imagine some of them who will be on, Mr. Madison, Mr. Hamilton, of course, my friend Ms. Schwint, who's an excellent 18th century cook. Some of those people will be joining me and talking about their lives. Try to get some more ladies on as well. And also let me know, what would you like to buy from Mrs. Q and her stores? I am going to be opening a Mrs. Q store, and I will be selling some of these things, but some of them I will sell and I'll make them all myself. Some of them will be purely 18th century fitted, like what I'm wearing tonight. And some of them I'm going to adjust so that you'll like them in the 21st century. But I will be making some chemise. You can wear their great nightgowns. I wear my own as nightgowns, and some bed jackets so that you can try them out and see what you think. So I'll be making some of those. So let me know what kinds of things you might like to buy. Mr. White, thank you for joining me. I know you've been watching me for a long time. Thank you. So thank you to everyone. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful week, a very happy new year. And thank you for staying with me all of this time. And I'll see you next week. And until then, I'll see you all on social media as well. Have a lovely evening.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Q.
Thank you guys all as well. It has been a pleasure.